I moved to Hallisburg in the spring of my 32nd year because my sister told me the rent was cheap and the people kept to themselves, and at the time, those were the two qualities I needed most in a place to live. I had just come out of a marriage that had ended without any of the dramatic parts a marriage is supposed to end with. No affair, no screaming. Just two people sitting at a kitchen table one Tuesday night, realizing they had run out of things to say to each other and being polite about it. I packed what I could fit in the back of a Subaru, signed papers I didn't read carefully, and drove east into the part of Pennsylvania where the maps start getting vague. Hallisburg is the kind of town that doesn't appear on most lists of towns. It sits in a fold of the Alleghenies, tucked into a valley that the highway forgot about decades ago when the new bypass went in. The main road into town curves down through pine forest and then opens up suddenly onto a single stoplight, a feed store, a bank that closes at 3, and a diner called Merle's, where the coffee tastes burned even when it's fresh. Beyond that, the town sprawls outward in modest streets of clapboard houses, a small grocery, a hardware store, a Methodist church, a Catholic church, and at the very heart of it all, the bell tower. The bell tower is the first thing you notice. It's the first thing anyone notices. It rises out of the old town hall building, a square brick structure built in 1887, and the tower itself adds another 40 feet on top, capped with a green copper roof that has gone the color of pond water. The bell inside is large. I know because I made the mistake of asking. It was cast in Cincinnati, hauled up by rail and then by mule, and installed before electricity reached the valley. It still rings on a mechanical timer that someone winds by hand every Sunday afternoon. It rings the hour. Just the hour. Not the half. Not the quarter. Just one solid stroke for 1 o'clock, 2 for 2, and so on, all the way through the day and into the night. That's what it was supposed to do anyway. I rented the upstairs apartment of a duplex on Crescent Street, 2 blocks from the town square, from a woman named Eileen Marsh, who was somewhere in her late 70s, and showed me around with the brisk patience of a person who had done this many times before. The apartment was furnished in a way that suggested several previous tenants had left things behind. A kitchen table with a wobble in one leg, a sagging couch, a bed frame that creaked like a ship, and on the wall above the radiator, a framed cross-stitch that read, "Be still and know." Eileen pointed out the thermostat, the fuse box, the trick to the bathroom faucet. Then she stood at the door with the keys in her palm and gave me a look I didn't understand at the time. "You'll hear the bell," she said. I told her I figured I would. "It rings on the hour." I said that was fine. I was a heavy sleeper, and I'd grown up near a fire station, so I was used to noise. She nodded, but slowly, the way a person nods when they have heard your answer and decided not to correct it. "On the hour," she said again. "That's what it does. That's all it does." Then she handed me the keys and told me to call her if the pilot light went out. I didn't think about it again for a few weeks. I was busy. I had moved to Hallisburg because I'd taken a remote job doing technical writing for a software company in Pittsburgh, and the work was the kind that fills your day without satisfying any part of you. I would wake up, make coffee, sit at my laptop for 9 or 10 hours, and then walk into town in the evening to eat something at Merle's or pick up groceries at the IGA. The bell rang the hours, just like Eileen had said. I'd hear it through the open window in the afternoons, a deep, resonant tone that traveled down the streets and seemed to settle into the brick and the wood of every building before fading. It was a sound I came to like. It made the town feel anchored. It made me feel anchored, which was something I needed. The first strange thing happened in early May, about 6 weeks after I moved in. I had been having trouble sleeping. Not insomnia exactly, just the kind of restlessness that comes when your body is in a new place and hasn't decided yet whether to trust it. I would fall asleep around 11, wake up around 2, and lie there for an hour or so, listening to the radiator click and the occasional car pass on the road below. On this particular night, I was awake at midnight when the bell rang 12. I counted the strokes the way you sometimes do when you're not really thinking about it. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. The last stroke faded into the dark, and I rolled over and tried to sleep. A few minutes later, the bell rang again. It was a single stroke, just one. Not loud, not soft. The same tone as the hour, but alone, suspended in the silence afterward like a question that hadn't been asked properly. I sat up in bed. I looked at my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up and showed me 12:03 a.m. I waited. I listened. Nothing else came. The town was silent in the way small towns are silent at night, which is not really silent at all, but full of the small ambient noises of houses settling and trees shifting and animals doing whatever animals do in the dark. I lay back down. I told myself the bell mechanism must have a hiccup, something mechanical, a spring that hadn't fully released, or a counterweight that had slipped. I told myself I'd ask Eileen about it. I didn't ask Eileen about it. I'm not sure why I didn't. I think part of me forgot, in the way you forget small, odd things in the morning, and another part of me felt strangely reluctant, as though bringing it up would be embarrassing somehow, like complaining about a noise no one else could hear. So I let it go. But the next night, I was awake again at midnight, partly out of curiosity, and I counted 12 strokes for the hour. And then, 3 minutes later, at 12:03, a single stroke. The night after that, the same thing. The night after that, the same thing. I started paying attention. I started staying up on purpose. I kept my phone on the nightstand and watched the clock turn over from 12:02 to 12:03. And at the exact moment that minute changed, the bell would sound. One stroke, not a fraction of a second early or late. A clean, deliberate ring, as though someone in the tower had reached up at precisely that moment and pulled the rope. It bothered me. Of course it bothered me. But I was new in town, and I was the kind of person who'd just gone through a divorce and moved to the middle of nowhere, which meant I was already suspicious of my own judgment about most things. So I waited. I figured I'd find a natural moment to mention it. The natural moment came at Merle's on a Saturday morning when I was sitting at the counter and the only other customer was a man named Ed Brassey, who I'd been introduced to twice already and who seemed to be at Merle's every time I went in. Ed was somewhere in his 60s, with a face like an old leather jacket and a habit of stirring his coffee long after the cream had dissolved. We had reached the point in our acquaintance where we nodded at each other and occasionally exchanged a sentence or two about the weather. I said, casually, while looking at my eggs, "Hey, is there something funny about the bell?" Ed didn't answer right away. He kept stirring his coffee. The spoon made a small circular sound against the inside of the mug. I waited. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. "The bell up at the town hall," I said. "I keep hearing it ring at like 3 after midnight. Just one stroke. Is that—" "Bell rings on the hour," Ed said. His voice was even and flat. He didn't look up. "Right," I said. "But after midnight it—" "Rings on the hour," Ed said again. "That's what it does." There was a pause. The waitress, whose name was Diane, had stopped near the coffee pot and was looking at me with an expression I didn't know how to read. Not hostile, not friendly, just very still, like a deer that has heard something in the trees and hasn't decided yet whether to run." I started to say something else, and Ed cut me off without raising his voice. "You don't want to talk about that in here," he said. He said it gently. That was the strange part. There was no edge to it, no warning, no anger. He said it the way you might tell a child not to touch a hot stove, with concern, with a faint trace of something that sounded almost like apology. Then he went back to his coffee, and Diane went back to whatever she had been doing, and the conversation was over. I finished my eggs in silence and walked home with the strangest feeling, which was not fear exactly, but the awareness that I had stepped on a tripwire I hadn't known was there. A tripwire that everyone else in town had been carefully stepping over for so long that they no longer thought of it as a tripwire at all. It was just part of the floor. That night, I lay in bed and waited for the bell. 12 strokes at midnight. Then 3 minutes of silence. Then 1 stroke at 12:03. After that, I started keeping notes. I want to explain something about Hallisburg, because it matters for what comes next. The town has about 1,100 people in it, and it is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, but not in the warm, neighborly way you sometimes see in movies. It's more like a long marriage that has settled into its routines. People are polite. They wave from porches. They show up to funerals and graduations. They hold the door at the post office. But there is also a deep, quiet privacy about Hallisburg, an unspoken agreement among everyone who lives there that certain things are not to be discussed, and you are expected to figure out what those things are without being told. I got the impression, in those first months, that there were a lot of those things. Not just the bell. There was the matter of the old quarry road, which everyone seemed to avoid, and the matter of the Henson house, which had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, and which no one ever talked about selling. There was the way certain people would not be in the cemetery after dark, even to lay flowers. There was the way the Methodist minister always ended Sunday service before sundown in the winter months, even when the schedule said otherwise. These were not rules anyone said out loud. They were just patterns. You could feel them in the way people moved, in the small adjustments they made to their days, in the silences they left where other towns would have had gossip. The bell was the biggest of these silences. I started watching the tower. From my apartment, if I leaned out of the kitchen window and looked down the street, I could see the top of it rising over the roof lines, the green copper cap, and the louvered openings where the bell hung. In the daytime, it looked normal enough, a piece of old civic architecture, the kind of thing you'd see on a postcard. At night, it was just a darker shape against the dark sky, the louvers like missing teeth in the silhouette. I started walking past it in the evenings. The town hall building was still in use during business hours. The mayor's office was on the ground floor, along with the records department and a small public library that smelled like old paper and floor wax. The tower itself was kept locked. There was a door inside the building, at the back of the records room, which led to a stairwell that went up. I asked the woman at the records desk, a tired-looking person named Mrs. Vance, if it was possible to see the bell. She looked at me for a long moment. "No," she said. "It isn't." "Is there a reason?" "It's not safe up there. The stairs are bad." "I'd sign a waiver." "There's no waiver to sign." I started to ask another question, and she shook her head, just once, very slightly, and went back to whatever she had been doing on her computer. I understood that I had been dismissed. I left. That night, the bell rang 12 at midnight, and 1 at 12:03, and I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook open and wrote down both times. I had decided to keep a log. I wrote the date, the times of the strokes, and any other details I could think of. The wind, the temperature, whether I had seen anyone outside, whether any dogs had barked. I did this for 2 weeks before the pattern started to shift. It was a Tuesday in late May. The night was warm and still. The bell rang 12 at midnight, exactly on time. I sat at my kitchen table with my pen ready and my notebook open. I waited. 12:03 came and went. The bell did not ring. I waited longer. 12:04. 12:05. Nothing. I got up and walked to the window. The town was dark and quiet. A single streetlight buzzed at the corner of Crescent and Main. There were no cars. No movement. I leaned out and looked down toward the tower. It was a black rectangle against a slightly less black sky. At 12:07, the bell rang once. The sound was different. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because it's the kind of detail that sounds invented when you say it out loud. But I'll try. The hour bell at midnight had been the same as always. Deep, full, resonant. A clean tone that filled the valley and faded slowly. The 12:03 stroke, every night before, had matched that tone. Same depth, same fullness, same fade. I had grown so used to it that I would have recognized any deviation immediately. The 12:07 stroke was muted. It sounded like the bell was wrapped in cloth, like someone had taken a heavy blanket and pressed it against the bronze. The tone was there, but the resonance was gone, and the fade was strange, too short, as though the sound had been cut off rather than allowed to die naturally. I stood at the window for a long time after that, listening. Nothing else came. After a while, I went back to the table and wrote down what I had heard. I underlined the time, 12:07. The next night, the bell rang 12 at midnight, and then nothing at 12:03, and then one stroke at 12:07. Muted, like the night before. The night after that, the same. The pattern had moved. I remember sitting at my table that third night and feeling, for the first time, something I would describe as actual fear. Not the casual unease I had been carrying for weeks. Real fear, low and quiet, because I understood now that whatever was happening with the bell was not a malfunction. Malfunctions are not consistent. Malfunctions do not shift to a new time and then hold that new time perfectly for 3 nights in a row. Whatever was making the bell ring at 12:07 had decided to ring at 12:07. There was an intention behind it. I want to skip ahead briefly, because I'm aware this is the kind of story where the listener wants to know whether I went up into the tower. I want to be honest about this. I thought about it. Of course I thought about it. I walked past the town hall in the daylight and looked at the door at the back of the records room. I looked at Mrs. Vance and considered asking her again. I thought about coming back at night, finding a way in. I am not proud of the fact that I thought about this. I will tell you what I did instead. I went to see Eileen. She lived in the lower half of the duplex, directly below me, and she had told me when I moved in that I could knock if I needed anything. I had not knocked once in 3 months. I went down the back stairs on a Thursday evening, around 7, and tapped on her kitchen door. I could see her through the glass, sitting at her own kitchen table, doing a crossword puzzle. She looked up, saw me, and waved me in without any sign of surprise, as though she had been expecting me eventually. She poured me a cup of tea before I had asked for one. She set it in front of me and sat down across the table and folded her hands. She didn't say anything. She waited. I told her about the bell. I told her about the 12:03 strokes I had been hearing every night for weeks, and how they had moved to 12:07, and how the tone had changed, and how I had been keeping notes, and how Ed Brassey had told me not to talk about it at Merle's, and how Mrs. Vance wouldn't let me see the tower. I told her all of this in one long, unbroken stream, and she listened to all of it without interrupting. And when I was done, she sat for a while looking at her tea. Then she said, "I was wondering when you'd come down." I asked her what she meant. "Most people who hear it come down within the first month," she said. "You took longer than most. I thought maybe you weren't going to hear it at all. Some people don't, you know. There are folks who've lived here their whole lives and never heard a thing past midnight." "What is it?" I asked. She took a sip of her tea. She thought for a long time before she answered. "I don't know what it is," she said finally. "I want to be clear about that. I'm 78 years old, and I was born in this house, and my mother was born in this house, and my grandfather built it. I have been hearing the bell after midnight my entire life. So has nearly everyone in town, and I will tell you the same thing my mother told me, which is the same thing her mother told her, which is what we tell anyone who comes here and asks." She set the cup down. "The bell rings on the hour. That's what it does. Anything else it does is its own business, and it's not yours, and it's not mine, and the people who tried to make it their business are not here anymore." I asked her what that meant. She shook her head. "It means what I said. There were people over the years, 3 I know of, in my lifetime. One was a man from Erie who came here in the 60s. He was a journalist. He thought he was going to write a book about it. He went up in the tower one night to see the bell ring after 12, and they found him the next morning at the bottom of the stairwell with his neck broken. The official report said he tripped. Maybe he did. Who were the others? A young woman from the college in 1987. She was studying folklore. She set up a tape recorder in the square at midnight and stayed up to watch. They found the recorder the next day, on the bench where she'd left it. They didn't find her. They never found her. Her car was still parked behind the post office for 2 weeks before her family came and took it away." She paused. "The third one was Eddie Marsh, my nephew. He was 23. He didn't believe any of it. He said it was all silliness, an old town with old superstitions. He went up in the tower in 1996, a few months before he was supposed to get married. He was a sweet boy, very smart, very stubborn." She looked at her hands. "They found him at the bottom of the stairs too, same as the journalist. They said he tripped." I was quiet for a while. "What's in the tower?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "I have never been up there. No one I know has been up there in my lifetime, except those 3, and none of them came down able to tell us. The bell is rung by a mechanism. The mechanism is wound on Sundays by Marvin Coyle, who is the maintenance man for the town hall, and who does not go past the 2nd floor. The tower itself has been locked since before I was born." "Then how does the bell ring at 12:03? "It used to ring at 12:03, she said. "It's ringing at 12:07 now. You told me yourself." "How does it ring at all? After midnight, when the mechanism is just for the hours?" She looked at me steadily. "That," she said, "is exactly the question we don't ask. And I am asking you, as someone who is renting an apartment from me and who I have come to like. Please do not start asking it now." I went back upstairs that night and sat in my kitchen and didn't write in my notebook. The bell rang 12 at midnight. At 12:07, the muted single stroke. I did not write it down, but I couldn't stop listening. I want to talk about what happens to a person who is paying attention to something that everyone around them has agreed not to pay attention to. There is a particular kind of loneliness that develops. You start to feel like you're the only one in a movie theater watching the screen, while everyone else has turned their chairs to face the wall. You start to wonder if the screen is actually there. You start to wonder if you're imagining the whole thing. And then the bell rings at 12:07, muted and wrong, and you know you aren't imagining it, but you also know that no one will ever confirm it for you. The reality you are experiencing is a reality of one. In June, the time shifted again. It happened on a Wednesday. The bell rang 12 at midnight. 12:07 came and went without a sound. I waited. I had stopped writing in the notebook by this point. I had taken Eileen's advice in that one small way, at least. But I still couldn't stop listening. I sat in the dark with my window cracked open and the night air coming in. At 12:11, the bell rang once. The tone was muted again, but worse than before. This time it wasn't just wrapped in cloth. It sounded almost wet. I don't know how else to describe it. The fade was strange and uneven, as though the bell were vibrating against something soft. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I closed the window. The next night, 12:11 again, and the next, and the next. I started doing the math in my head, even though I didn't want to. 12:03, then for 3 or 4 weeks. Then 12:07 for about 2 weeks. Then 12:11. The interval was widening. Whatever it was getting later, and the gaps between shifts were getting shorter. I told myself I wouldn't think about what happened when it reached 12:59. I told myself I'd be gone by then. I had a lease, but leases can be broken. I had a job, but my job could be done from anywhere. I could pack the Subaru in an hour. I could be on the highway before the bell rang the next night. I told myself this, and I did not pack. I want to be honest about why I didn't pack. It would be easy to say I was trapped, that the town had its hooks in me, that something supernatural was holding me there. None of that would be true. I stayed because I was curious, and I stayed because I had nowhere better to go. And I stayed because the loneliness of the apartment was a familiar loneliness, and the loneliness of being divorced and rootless somewhere new would have been a worse one. I stayed because the bell was, in a strange way, the only thing in my life that was happening on a schedule. It was something to wait for. And I am embarrassed by that. And I am telling you anyway, because anything less would be a lie. In late June, something else started to happen. I began to notice that other people in town were keeping track of the bell in their own quiet ways. It was not something they did openly. But once I knew to look, I saw it everywhere. I saw it in the way Diane, the waitress at Merle's, would glance at the clock above the pie case at certain moments when I was eating dinner there, and how her glance would last just a beat longer than a normal time check. I saw it in the way Marvin Coyle, the maintenance man, kept a small notebook in the breast pocket of his coveralls, and how he would take it out sometimes when he was sitting on the bench outside the hardware store and write in it briefly before putting it back. I saw it in the way the lights in certain houses on my block went off at almost exactly the same time every night, somewhere between 11:50 and 11:55 p.m., as though the residents had decided not to be awake when midnight came. I saw it most clearly in Eileen, who I now noticed always made a point of being in bed by 11:30, and who kept a small wind-up alarm clock by her bed instead of a digital one, and who, when I happened to come downstairs once around midnight to retrieve a package I'd forgotten to bring up, was sitting fully dressed at her kitchen table with the lights off and her hands folded in her lap, doing nothing. She saw me through the glass and waved me past, very gently, without smiling. I went back upstairs and didn't ask. In early July, I had what I now think of as the closest thing to a conversation about the bell that anyone in Hallisburg ever offered me, and it came from a person I would not have expected. His name was Caleb Ross, and he was the night clerk at the gas station on the edge of town, the one out by the highway turnoff. I had taken to driving out there sometimes around 11 at night, just to be moving, just to be doing something other than sitting in the apartment waiting for midnight. The gas station was the only thing open that late. Caleb worked the overnight shift alone. He was probably 25, 26. Tall, thin, with the kind of face that had not yet decided what it was going to look like as an adult. He always had a paperback open on the counter. Stephen King, mostly. He had been friendly to me from the first time I came in. That night I bought a coffee and a bag of pretzels, and I was leaning on the counter while he rang me up, and I said, without quite planning to, "Can I ask you something weird?" He looked up. His eyes were tired but alert. "Sure," he said. "Do you hear it?" I said. "After midnight. The bell." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set the pretzels down on the counter without sliding them toward me. "Yeah," he said, "I hear it." I felt something loosen in my chest. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud to me. I think I might have actually exhaled, the way you do when you've been holding your breath without realizing it. "It's at 12:11 now, right?" I said. He nodded. "It used to be 12:07. He nodded again. "And before that, 12:03. Before that, 11:57, he said. I stared at him. "What?" "When I was a kid," he said, "it was at 11:57, before midnight, not after. My grandma used to say the bell rang twice, once a few minutes before 12, and then 12 times at 12. She said when she was a girl, it was at 11:53. It moves. It's been moving the whole time, just very slowly." I asked him which way it was moving. He looked at me with something almost like pity. "You already figured that out," he said, "or you wouldn't be asking." He slid the pretzels across the counter. "It's moving toward 1, he said. "It always has been. It's going to get there eventually." I asked him what happens when it reaches 1. He didn't answer right away. He looked out through the glass doors of the gas station, into the dark parking lot, where my Subaru was the only car. The fluorescent lights inside hummed softly. "I don't know," he said. "Nobody alive knows. The last time it happened was before any of us were born." "It's happened before?" "Couple times, I guess, according to the stories. The bell crosses over to the next hour, and something happens, and then it starts over, moves back to right after the new hour, and starts crawling forward again." My grandma said, when she was very small, her grandmother told her the bell had once reached 2 o'clock, and that the year it reached 2 was the year half the town got sick and died, and the rest moved away, or stayed, and didn't talk about it. He paused. "I think that's why nobody talks about it. Not because they don't notice. Because the last time people talked about it, the talking didn't help. I drove home that night with the windows down and the cold mountain air coming in. The bell rang 12 at midnight. At 12:11, the muted single stroke. I sat on my couch in the dark, and I thought about Caleb's grandmother, and about the year the bell reached 2. And I thought about how slowly something can creep across the face of a clock when no one is looking. And I thought about how quickly that creep starts to feel like a march once you understand what direction it is going. In late July, the time shifted to 12:16. In early August, to 12:22. The shifts were getting closer together. The tone of the late stroke kept getting worse. By mid-August, it didn't even sound like a bell anymore. It sounded like the memory of a bell, like a recording of a bell played back through bad speakers in an empty room. And underneath the muted tone there was something else, something that I could only hear if I held my breath and concentrated, a kind of low, steady noise like breathing, except not quite breathing. Slower than breathing, more like the sound of a very large lung at the bottom of a very deep well. I started sleeping with earplugs. The earplugs didn't help. I could feel the stroke through the floor of the apartment, through the bed frame, through my own teeth. I went to see Eileen again. She was at her kitchen table doing a crossword. She let me in. She poured me tea, She didn't ask why I had come. It's getting later, I said. I know. It's also getting worse. She nodded. How long, I asked, before it reaches 1? She set down her pencil. My mother kept a record, she said. She started it when she was 12, the year her own mother died, and she kept it until she went into the home. She used to say the bell shifted by 3 minutes a year, more or less, when she was young. Slower than that sometimes. Faster lately. It's been shifting by more than 3 minutes a month for me, I said. I know. Why is it speeding up? She looked at me for a long moment. I don't know, she said, but I have a guess. I think the bell shifts faster when more people are listening. Not just hearing it, but listening, paying attention, counting, writing it down. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You think I'm making it worse? I said. I think, she said carefully, that the bell does what the bell does, and I have lived with it for 78 years, and the years when nothing seemed to happen were the years when nobody in town was paying very close attention. And there are a few of us paying close attention now. You? Caleb, the Henderson boy who came back from college last summer and started asking questions. A few others. What happens if it reaches 1? I told you. I don't know. What do you think happens? She was quiet. I think, she said slowly, that the bell is something that was put there a long time ago to mark the boundary between one thing and another thing. And I think every time it shifts, the boundary shifts with it. I think it has been shifting for a long, long time, and most of those shifts have been small, and most of those years, the boundary stayed roughly where it was supposed to be. But sometimes, every few generations, it shifts far enough that the boundary moves into a place where it doesn't belong. And when that happens, something gets through. What gets through? She shook her head. I told you, I don't know. The last time it happened, the people who would have told us are dead. And it has not been the policy of this town, for a very long time, to look closely at the question. I asked her what I should do. She looked at me with something that was almost tenderness. Stop listening, she said. I tried. I want you to know that I tried. I bought a white noise machine. I started playing music in the apartment all night. Soft and steady, instrumental things, no lyrics. The kind of thing that fills a room without demanding attention. I started staying out late, driving the back roads past the quarry and out to the highway and back, trying to time my returns so that I was already asleep before the bell rang 12. I called my sister and asked if I could come stay with her for a while in Cleveland, and she said yes, of course, but I never went. I told her I'd come the following weekend. I told her that for 3 weekends in a row. The bell shifted to 12:31, then 12:38, then 12:46. Each shift came faster than the last. By the end of August, it was happening every few days. The tone was no longer a tone. It was a pressure. It pressed against the windows from the outside. It pressed against my eardrums from the inside. It made the dishes in my kitchen cabinet rattle very softly, on a frequency I felt rather than heard. People in town stopped going outside after dark. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody put up signs or made announcements. But the streets emptied earlier each evening. Merle started closing at 9 instead of 10. The IGA closed at 8. The streetlights, which had always been a little unreliable, started going out one by one and didn't get fixed. By the first week of September, my block was completely dark by nightfall, except for the single buzzing lamp at the corner of Crescent and Main. I saw Eileen on her porch one evening, just before dark. She was sitting in a wicker chair, with a shawl around her shoulders, looking at the western sky. I went down to sit with her. We didn't talk for a long time. Finally, she said, "I think it's going to reach 1 this time." I asked her how she knew. "I can feel it," she said. "I felt it before, when I was a girl. My mother felt it too. There's a thinness in the air. The dogs know. The birds know. They've been leaving." I had not noticed about the birds. Now that she said it, I realized I hadn't heard a bird in a week. Not a single one. Not in the morning. Not in the evening. The trees were quiet. "What do we do?" I asked. "We do what we've always done," she said. "We don't talk about it. We stay inside. We close our windows. We don't count the strokes. We don't write down the times. We sleep through it if we can, and we hope that whatever comes through is small and quiet and goes back where it came from before morning." "And if it doesn't?" She didn't answer. The night the bell reached 12:58 was a Friday in early September. I knew it would happen that night because the previous night it had rung at 12:54, and the night before that, 12:51, and the curve had become so steep that I could plot it on paper and predict the next stroke to within a minute. I plotted it on paper. I shouldn't have. I know now that plotting it was its own kind of attention, its own kind of feeding. But I did it anyway, because I am the kind of person who keeps notebooks, and the notebooks are how I make the world feel manageable. And on that Friday night, I knew with certainty that the bell would ring at 12:58 or 12:59, and I knew that meant the next night, or the night after, it would reach 1. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off and the windows closed, and the white noise machine playing, even though it didn't help. The bell rang 12 at midnight. The strokes were heavier than usual. The whole apartment seemed to hum in sympathy with each one. My teeth hurt. At 12:58, the late stroke came. It did not sound like a bell. It did not sound like anything. It was a single, long, low pressure that rolled through the town for what felt like a full minute. And underneath it was that breathing, slower and deeper than ever. And inside the breathing was something that almost sounded like a word. I could not make out the word. I do not want to be able to make out the word. I sat at my table with my hands over my ears, and I could feel it in my hands, in my arms, in the bones of my skull. When it finished, I looked at my phone. The screen was blank, not off, blank, in a way that suggested it didn't know what to display. I touched it. The screen flickered and came back. The time was 12:59. I went downstairs. I don't know why I went downstairs. I want to be honest about that. I don't know if I went out of fear, or out of some need to check on Eileen, or because I had finally lost some part of my judgment that had been holding me in place. I just went. Her kitchen door was unlocked. The lights were off. She was sitting at her table, in the dark, fully dressed, with her hands folded in her lap. The wind-up clock on the counter was ticking softly. She looked up when I came in. She did not seem surprised. "Sit down," she said. I sat. "You shouldn't be down here." "I know." "You shouldn't have come." "I know." We sat in the dark, and we listened. The town was completely silent. Not a car, not a dog, not a single human sound from any of the houses around us. Just the ticking of the wind-up clock, and the faint sound of my own breathing, and Eileen's, slower than mine. The clock ticked toward 1. At 12:59 and some number of seconds, Eileen reached out across the table and took my hand. Her hand was very cold. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Don't count," she whispered. "Whatever it does, don't count." The bell rang. I'm going to try to describe what happened, even though I am not sure I can. It rang once, at the exact moment the wind-up clock's minute hand touched the 1. The sound was enormous. It was bigger than the building. It was bigger than the valley. It was the sound a bell makes when it is no longer a bell, but a doorway. And through the doorway, I could feel something looking. Not at me, specifically. At the town. At the whole town, all at once. The way a person looks down at an anthill they have just noticed in their yard. I closed my eyes. I held Eileen's hand. I did not count. There was nothing to count. The single stroke went on, and underneath it the breathing was very close, and the word I could not understand was being spoken slowly, syllable by syllable, in a voice so low it was almost not a voice at all. And then it stopped. Just like that. The pressure released. The air went normal. The wind-up clock ticked. Eileen exhaled, very slowly, and her hand relaxed in mine. We sat in the dark for what felt like a long time. I don't know how long it actually was. Eventually, she let go of my hand and stood up, slowly, and walked to the window and looked out. Then she came back and sat down. "It went back," she said. "What?" "It went back. The bell. It rang at 1, and then it went back. We're inside the new hour now. It'll start over." "Start over how?" "Tomorrow night. It'll ring at 1:03, or 1:02, or whenever it starts, and it'll start creeping forward again, toward 2. I didn't say anything. "My mother lived through one of these," she said. "She told me about it. The bell crossed over to 1 when she was 19. She said that for the next 40 years, it crawled toward 2. And then her mother died, and her grandmother died, and the town shrank, and the bell crawled and crawled and crawled, and one night when she was almost 60, it reached 2. And then it crossed back. She lived to see 2 crossings. I think I'm going to live to see this one and the next one too." She looked at me. "You won't. You'll be long gone." "I'm not gone yet." "You will be. Soon. You should go tomorrow. You can't be here for this part." "What part?" She didn't answer. She got up and made tea. She poured me a cup. We drank it in silence. Outside, the town was beginning to make small sounds again. A dog barked somewhere far away. A car started 2 streets over. The world was coming back. I left Hallisburg 3 days later. I packed the Subaru in the morning. I took my notebooks. I took my white noise machine. I took the cross-stitch off the wall above the radiator, the one that said, "Be still and know," because Eileen told me I should have something from the apartment to remember her by. I went down and hugged her on the porch. She was thinner than she'd been when I moved in, although I am not sure if that was real or something I imagined. She told me to drive carefully. She told me not to come back, even to visit. She told me she would write to me, but she never did. I drove out of town past the bell tower. It was just before noon, and the bell rang 12 as I was passing it. The hour stroke. The normal sound, deep and resonant, the way it had been when I first arrived. It sounded like a bell again. It sounded like nothing was wrong. I watched the green copper cap recede in the rearview mirror until the road curved and the trees swallowed it, and I drove out through the pine forest and back up onto the bypass and west, away from the valley, away from Hallisburg, toward Cleveland, and my sister, and the rest of my life. I have been gone for almost 6 years now. I want to tell you that I never think about it. I want to tell you that I built a new life, and the bell faded into the kind of memory you sometimes wonder if you invented. That would be a satisfying ending. That would be the kind of thing a person says at the close of a story like this, with a small, wry smile, to suggest that they are over it now. But I am not over it. I have an apartment in Cleveland. I have a job I like better than the old one. I have a small circle of friends and a cat named Walter, and a relationship with my sister that has improved with proximity. I have, in most ways, a normal life. I sleep well. I dream rarely. I do not jump at sudden sounds. But every night, just before I go to bed, I find myself checking the clock. Not consciously. It's a habit I picked up in Hallisburg and never lost. I check the clock at 11:55. I check it at midnight. And I check it again, at some point in the next hour, without meaning to. The exact minute is not the same every night. It moves. I have started keeping a notebook again. I tell myself I'm not keeping track. I tell myself the notebook is for grocery lists and reminders. But last week, I opened it at random and saw a list of times, in my own handwriting, going back several months. 12:14, 12:21, 12:29, 12:37, 12:44. The times are creeping forward, 3 or 4 minutes at a time, week by week. They're not bell strokes. There is no bell here in Cleveland. There is only the clock, and the moment I look at it, and the strange small certainty I feel each night that I have looked at exactly the right minute, even though I am not trying to. I called Caleb once, the gas station clerk. I had his number from a receipt he'd written it on, years ago, when he told me to call him if I ever wanted to talk about it. He answered on the third ring. He sounded older. He told me he had moved to Pittsburgh. He told me he was doing fine. I asked him if he ever still found himself checking the clock. He was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said. At a time that moves? Yes. Toward what? He didn't answer. He just laughed, very softly, in a way that wasn't really a laugh. You know toward what, he said. You always knew. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing, and then we hung up, and I have not called him again. I want to end this by saying something useful. I want to give you a warning, or a lesson, or a piece of practical advice, the way the narrator at the end of a story like this is supposed to. I have thought about it a lot, and I'm not sure I have anything to offer. I will tell you this. If you ever find yourself in a small town that is quieter than it should be, and the people there have a way of changing the subject when you bring up some specific thing, a road, a building, a sound, a time of night, please believe them when they don't tell you. They are not being mysterious. They are not being unfriendly. They are protecting you. They have lived with the thing longer than you have, and they have learned, the way people learn anything important, by watching what happens to those who didn't. And if you do hear the thing they're not talking about, and you start to count it, or write it down, or wait for it, please understand that you are not just observing it. You are participating in it. Attention is not free. Attention is the thing it eats. Nobody in Hallisburg talked about the bell after 12:03 a.m. Then they didn't talk about it after 12:07, then 12:11, then later and later, until they were not talking about it at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then they were not talking about it at all, because the bell had crossed over and gone back and started its long, slow crawl toward the next hour, the way it has been doing since before any of them were born. Nobody talks about the bell. That is the rule. That has always been the rule. It is the only rule the town has, and it is the only one that matters, and I am breaking it now, here, with you, because I have come to understand something about rules like this one. Once you have heard the bell, you don't get to stop hearing it. You only get to choose how loudly you listen. I am trying to listen quietly. I am trying very hard. Some nights I do better than others. Some nights I open the notebook and I see the times in my own handwriting, and I close it again without adding to it. Some nights I add to it anyway. The clock on my nightstand says 12:46 right now. I'm going to put this away and go to sleep. I am not going to look up again until morning. I hope.